Good afternoon and welcome to our session, I Hate Math, How to Help Your Students Overcome Their Fear of Mathematics. Our presenter today is Jennifer Johnke, faculty member at South College. If you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those in the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I'll hand it over to our presenter.
Thank you. And I am very excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to share my screen here. All right. So in math, we so often hear, I hate math. And so over the years, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know which one, I have encountered a lot of students who have told me they hate math. And that honestly is not always the case. It's not always what they're struggling with. Sometimes it's just their past experiences. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about me. I know you had a little intro, but I wanted to give you my background and how I've gotten to where I'm at today. I've actually spent a lot of years in K-12 education. The majority of my career actually was in K-12 education, where I was a math teacher for 10 years and then transitioned to assistant principal and then high school principal. And then most recently, I entered into post-secondary education, where I was the department chair of general education and math faculty for 2 years. I was adjunct faculty before that. And then honestly, when the position presented itself, I agreed to move to the position of Dean of Academics and Student Services. And I've only been in this role now for about 2 months. So I've stepped away from the classroom a little bit, but so there's my background. And along the way, I've seen a lot of things. And so, as I said, for many years, we've heard, I hate math. And a lot of students do believe that they hate math. And in fact, when my students came into my classroom, I would jokingly say, okay, who loves math? Raise your hand. And I would often be the only one with my hand raised. And I would laugh and I would just say, okay, by the end of this course, I really want you to at least hate math just a little bit less. And I also asked them to stick with me. I would always tell them, number one, week 1 is going to be the most difficult week. And I said, I would tell them, I don't know why, although I do know why, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but I would always say week 1 is going to be the most difficult week. And if you stick with me just through week 1, you're going to find out that weeks 2, 3, 4, 5 are going to get so much easier. And inevitably, around week 5 or so, all of my students would say, I don't get it. I never believed you, but week 1 was the hardest week. It was the most difficult. Why is that? Well, it's because we had some hurdles to get over. And that is their math anxiety. So a lot of students come to us with math anxiety, and it has an impact on their academic achievement. So a study by Ashcraft in 2002 found that math anxiety is commonly defined as a feeling of tension, apprehension, or fear that interferes with math performance. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of my students where this was a very, very real problem. And obviously in the classroom, we see a wide spectrum of this, where it might just be nerves for them or the hate of math to something that absolutely is impeding their success. So then from there was another study in 2001 where individuals with high math anxiety demonstrated smaller working memory spans. And again, when they're suffering with math anxiety, that's impeding their ability to internalize the content and also then regurgitate what they have learned. The recall is disappearing because all the focus is put on that math anxiety. And so then on this third study, here is the key. Teachers support positive attitudes in math if they provide encouragement and emphasize that mistakes are also part of successful learning. And that's one thing as well that I talk about with students, especially if I go back to my years in K-12 education. I taught geometry for a lot of years, which of course is the dreaded proofs. Nobody liked proofs except for me. I loved them. However, and I would tell my students, it's easy for me to stand up here and know exactly how to do that proof because I've been doing math for so many years. But it's new to you and you are going to make mistakes. And that's why we use a pencil in math, because we know that mistakes are made in math. So one of the things that I have learned along the way as well was to really allow the students to lead me in some of my instruction instead of walking them every time through it to avoid pitfalls and avoid mistakes. Sometimes it's okay to watch them walk right into that mistake and then to say, okay, we didn't get it this time. Let's go back and let's start again. And sometimes we do make mistakes in math. There we go. So I want to talk about two examples of students that really have impacted my instruction and how I have approached these situations. And the first one isn't even my own example. It comes from my father, who was also a math teacher. And he taught junior high math, and he talks about this student that we'll call Johnny. And he was giving a test one day, and he noticed Johnny was kind of acting a little bit odd, a little awkward. And so he went over and noticed that Johnny had a cheat sheet stuffed under his test. So he signaled for Johnny to go out into the hallway with him. And Johnny immediately said, "I'll go to the office. I know, I'm done. I get a 0. And my dad said, "No, that's not what we're going to do. You're going to go back in there. I'll let you keep that cheat sheet. You're going to finish your test, but then you're going to spend every day after school with me until you don't need that cheat sheet anymore." And so Johnny went back in and he spent every afternoon with my dad, learning the math content and reinforcing it. And at some point, my dad said to him, "You know what, Johnny? You don't need to stay after school with me anymore." And he's like, "No, Mr. Stillman, you don't get it. I've never been able to get math before. This is the trick. I'm staying with you forever." And so I look back on that when I was getting into my own career and thought, you know what, how many teachers had taken the easy way out? Because Johnny was a discipline problem. Why was he a discipline problem? Because he was not learning the content that he needed to. He hated math. He could not keep himself in the classroom because he was covering that anxiety. He was covering that misunderstanding or lack of understanding with math. And so it was so easy to send him to the office and throw your hands up and say, "I'm not dealing with Johnny." But instead, he was given those resources to be successful, and he was. Then I have my own example of Jackie, and Jackie is a recent one. In fact, I worked with Jackie while I was in my last position here at South College, and Jackie was not coming to class. And unfortunately, my mind immediately went to, I cannot believe Jackie is skipping class. Like, what is going on? And her grades were showing it. And again, very easy to just step back and say, okay, whatever, she decided that she's not coming to class. And so I'm just going to step back and not deal with it. However, instead, thankfully, I took a deep breath and I called Jackie and I said, Jackie, I noticed that you haven't been coming to class, and I'm wondering what's going on. What can I do to help? And immediately she started to cry. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I have come to the school every single day, and I get to the classroom door and I can't come in. I have to go to the bathroom because I am nauseous. I am sick to my stomach. I cannot do it. And so I said, okay, Jackie, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to meet you at the door and we're going to come in together. And I promise you, I will not call on you. I will not put you on the spot, but we're going to do this together. So I did. I met her at the door that first day. She sat down at her computer. Her hands were shaking. She was so absolutely mortified. And then she made it through the class. I stayed with her after class and just recapped everything and said, let's reinforce this content and then let's get through your assignment. She got through the assignment. The next class did the same thing, kept reinforcing it, reinforcing it. We got to the end of the term and she was again in tears, only this time they were tears of pride and happiness because she was passing the class. And she said, I have never been able to get through a math class on the first try. And so it's those things where if you don't figure out where they are at, you're going to lose them. And so it's putting those supports and resources in place that will help them succeed. And so let's talk a little bit about support and resources for students. As I mentioned, find out where they are at. Again, it's very easy to say, oh, they're just not coming to class, or, oh, they're just not doing their assignments, or they're rushing through and things like that. But when you dig a little deeper, you can find out what that background is and find the why. Were they told all through their years of schooling that they were not good at math and that they were never going to be good at math, and told them this should be easy, you should be able to get that? You know, we all had that math teacher who really made us not feel great, even those of us who were good at math. If you didn't have that, I applaud your math teachers, because it's so easy sometimes to slip into that. And so, you know, find the why, identify their backgrounds and their history in math. Again, what did they have before they came into your classroom? Find a way to connect with them. And is that talking to them on the phone? Sometimes that quiet tutoring after class is a good way to do that. And I'm going to go into a couple of things that I have done to help bridge that gap as well. Provide a safe space. Sometimes if the students just see you as a human, and so having that safe space where they can work on their math and maybe just talk to you as a person, they feel safe in that space. But I also know that you have to be ready to push, but you've got to do so carefully. They've got to keep moving through that class. They've got to progress. They've got to find success, but you need to do so carefully. If I had pushed Jackie too soon, it would have been disastrous. I would have lost her. So I had to get to know her again. Everything that I talked about in those first 5 bullets, I needed to know that in order to know when I could push so that I could get her to help her get to the end of the course. And you do all of that by getting to know your students. So one of the things that I did in order to help the students succeed. Oh,
hi, stats class.
So one of the things is I tried to create an environment that feels like the physical classroom, but is accessible. And this one kind of happened by accident because I was teaching an online course. And so I wanted the resources available to students who may struggle with an online setting because it doesn't feel like the typical classroom. And so I went through and recorded all of the videos for every single lesson that I was teaching so that the students would feel like they were coming to my classroom and sitting in my classroom. So here's a glimpse.
So now that we're beginning this course, I am going to record all the lessons. So basically it's going to be just like you are sitting right here in my classroom, as long as you watch the videos. And so what I do is I go through the topics that you'll find in the Learn portion of Hawks, and then I'll go through the practice with you so that when we're done, you can jump right into the Certify, get the Certify done, take your quiz for the week, and we're ready to roll. Of course, if you have any questions, make sure that you join in on the Math Lab. I will post my on-campus times that you can come in for help. There are also virtual times as well, so make sure that you check those out. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to jump right into our first lesson, which is 1.2 data classification. So I'm going to go into the Learn section because there's a few things that we need to hit on. And the first one we need to talk about is qualitative and quantitative data. And qualitative data is labels or descriptions of traits, their qualities.
So that's just an example of the videos that I created for every section so that students had that available to them. And then what I found was once I started teaching, so I started off teaching that course online, and then I switched to teaching it on ground. And I found that the students were still utilizing my videos as resources because they would get home and they would say, okay, what did she say about qualitative data? Or what did she do in this instance? And so having those resources for them when they're working on their assignments at 2 in the morning, when I am not going to be able to respond to them, is such a valuable tool. However, I also found that sometimes it doesn't go as planned while you're planning that out. And you also get freeze frames, which are delightful, but always I don't even know. I was going to say pre-watch your video before you post it, because I did not, and I'll show you what happens sometimes when it doesn't go as planned.
They're going to give us the point -5. And the second one is a question mark. I'm just going to call that second point Y, because remember my points are X, Y. I'm going to do this now. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is, you'll notice I have my problem written out here. And remember that second point was a question mark. So I'm going to leave that second number as a Y, because that's going to tell me what to fill in for. I'm just going to write this over here. Remember, your points are always X, Y. And we were.
Oh, yes, I did. I recorded an entire video of the side of my head and I posted it out there. So obviously I thought I was recording myself working out the problems, but it was a disaster. However, it also is a great way for students to see we do make mistakes. Remember what I talked about at the beginning? Sometimes in math, there are mistakes that are made, and that was a very big one. And so they laughed, and then they came to class. And before I jump into, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. So the other thing that I found, which I'm going to address my mistake on here when I talk to my students, but the other thing that came about was at the recommendation of some of my students. Again, they were commenting on how much they would love to have, and this is for a college algebra course, and they commented on how much they would love to be able to go back and replay class when they're at home. And so I thought to myself, oh, why don't I just record it while I'm teaching it? We have Zoom, which is such a fantastic tool. Why don't I just bring in my laptop, record it, and then they can play it back when they're at home? And so that was born out of students just happening to mention it. And it was not any extra work. And so here's a little clip from that.
Was ridiculous. I don't know why it worked. I recorded both videos. If anybody watched it, I recorded both videos exactly the same way. And one of them recorded the side of my head and the other one recorded my work. So I apologize. We're going to work a little bit backwards. These questions you could actually see on my first video, but I'll turn it just so that we have something that's working together. So on this one, we're going to work backwards. They're going to give us the points instead of us plotting the points. So again, we start at 0, 0, and we're going to find that the coordinates of A. So we do our right, left first. So am I moving to the right or the left to get to A?
So again, just owning my mistake, addressing it, but then just recording everything I did in class. And then I posted it. We operate out of Canvas. And so I just posted those videos, and what I would do
was ridiculous.
Whoops. So what I would do is I would just post that after class so that they would have it. It also addresses students who miss class for whatever reason. So maybe they have a sick child or they got COVID or something like that and can't come to class. Those resources are there as well, but it also supports those who hate math or have math anxiety, or because that working memory may or may not be operating the way it needs to. And so it's a way to reinforce those concepts in a way that is non-threatening. They don't need to, whoops, sorry, back. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm needing to go back and now I can't see it. There we go. So that's one way that they can do it without feeling out of place, especially when they're not quite comfortable asking you for help or asking questions. They have that reinforcement there. Also, communicate. Try to head off natural procrastination, particularly if you're teaching online courses. It's really, really easy for students to just put it off, especially when they don't like the subject or they're afraid of the subject or they have that anxiety embedded in there. Try to head that off early. As soon as you see that happening, try to intervene. Just like I talked about with Jackie, I was reaching out to her. She missed the first class, sent her a little message, didn't hear anything. When she missed the second class, that's when I called her, because I wanted to make sure that I was intervening, figuring out what was going on. One of the questions I often get is, what do we do when students will not respond to our emails and they won't pick up the phone? Google Voice is a really good tool because a lot of times students will respond to text messages when they will not pick up the phone. I will call a student, they will not answer, then I send them a message through Google Voice and they respond right away. So if that's where they're comfortable, again, meet them where they're at. So reaching out through phone, email, messaging system, and I always include Google Voice in there as well. On one of my videos, I think the stats one, I talked about in-person tutoring times, and that was something that I would try to honestly tie to either the beginning or the end of my in-person classes, but also know that it was open to anyone to come in. That way, if I have a student in my in-person on-ground class that needs a little bit of extra help, then I'll just mention it to them on my way by. Hey, stay after a little bit today so we can work on X, Y, or Z. What I found though was a lot of times the majority of the class will stay because they know that I'm there to answer questions. They know that I'm there for extra help. And again, it's about creating that safe space. It's that space where students want to be and they want to stay. And so they'll just be there. And then the ones who really need the help, they don't feel so out of place, because when you have an entire classroom of students staying, then they're not feeling singled out. What you do have to do though, is make sure that you're kind of watching, because the students who really suffer from that anxiety are not the ones who are going to ask the questions. So I'm always watching their progress and watching to see if they're struggling on certain questions. And then I'll just slide up and see what they're working on and just offer my advice instead of waiting for that question. A lot of times that helps. But also providing virtual tutoring times, because sometimes those in-person times don't work, whereas they can jump on some Zoom tutoring times and then they can touch base with you there. And I would try to do those at times when maybe they were a little bit more flexible. So something in the evening or something in the very early morning, within reason, obviously, but something that will work with their schedules, or maybe some Saturday hours or things like that, just to try to offer those options for them. And encourage. I can't say that enough, because they need that encouragement. They need someone telling them that they're going to succeed, and you might be the only one who's doing that. And so here's an example of a student who just sent me an email and said, hi, whoops, gosh, I keep tapping my thing. Hi, professor, it's me again. Problems like this I'm getting stuck on. So she sent me the picture, which was great, because then I was just able to respond back to her and say, you are correct. You cannot combine these because one of the terms has a y squared and one has a y. And so those are not like terms. Don't put them together. And so then she responded great, and she was able to move on with her assignment. But it's letting them know that when you do get stuck, please reach out to me. And one of those great ways to do that in Hawks is through the send to instructor button. And you do have to enable that within your tools. But once you do, when the students are working through their practice problems and they get stuck, they can click on that and it will send you an email on the problem that they are stuck on. And then you can respond back to them or follow up with them, whether that's sending a video or just working through it. One of the really great tools that I've been using lately is a Rocketbook. And a Rocketbook is basically a reusable notebook, in case anybody doesn't know what it is. But you can write on it, and then there's an app that comes with it. And the app scans the page and then uploads that page as a PDF. And so then I would take that PDF and I would email it to students, and it would have all of my steps on it. And also a nice feature of that is I would write out all of my notes, because some students, while they really like the videos, some are very visual or read-write learners. And so they want the written notes as well. So I would write out my notes instead of writing them on a sheet of paper. I would write them out on my Rocketbook and then upload them as a PDF that I can share out to my students as well. And that's been a really great tool for sharing that information. And then this is just what I was talking about. Unfortunately, this video had identifying factors in it, so I couldn't play the whole video. But for any of you who are currently teaching stats through Hawks, this section seems to always give my students fits, probably because somewhere along the way, if you make a little tiny mistake, it's going to throw off everything. But on this one, she sent me the send to instructor, and I was able to go through and I worked out that problem for her in a video. And then I sent her that video, and then she responded, I see it. And so then she was able to keep going. So that's something too, that's another tool for students. And again, it goes back to how do they learn, what best works for them, and what tools are going to make sense for them. Is it meeting in person over Zoom? Is it working it out on paper or in Rocketbook and sending them the step-by-step work? Is it just talking to them through an email or a phone call? Or is it recording all of your steps so they can follow with you? And it's just figuring out what works for those students and what best way to work out that problem as well. You know, for this one right here, it made more sense for me to do it step by step for her. And so the video made the most sense. But again, it's just doing what works best for you and what works best for your students. Another benefit of Hawks, and I'm going to say this very cautiously because it can go either way. So it's all about how you present it to the students. So you get immediate feedback. What I love about that is that you are never going to have students who are going to learn it wrong, so to speak. In other words, they are never going to reinforce the mistakes. They know right away whether or not they've got it. And so they can go back, correct their mistakes, and then keep moving forward. However, what can happen is that for a student who has a lot of math anxiety, if they do see your answer is incorrect and they've got the red on the bottom, sometimes that can send them into a tailspin. And so it's all about how you present that. And honestly, when I'm working out problems with my students in class, I put up practice on the screen and I will sometimes put in the wrong answer so that they can see, it's red. And then they'll say, no, Dr. Johnke, that was a typo. You typed it in wrong. I'm like, oh yeah. And so we go back, but also knowing that for some students, when they see that red, they're going to stop and they're going to panic. And so it's talking to them about how we go through that. So let's look at that explain error button. If you really just froze, or was it a typo? Look here, I put an X on the end of it. I didn't need that X. That's why I got it wrong. And so it's really helping them look to see what's going on there. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that we need to look at it and see what's going on. And as you know, in Hawks, once you click into explain error, it'll walk you through the steps. It will tutor you. It will take you back into the learn section. So there are a lot of features there that can really reinforce the content. And then also letting the students know, if you get stuck, go back, check out my video. I worked out every single one of these problems just with different numbers. So if you need that reinforcement, just go back and look at that. And if you really get stuck, then click on send instructor, send me a message. Let's set up some tutoring. Let's set up some, let me work through the problem with you, things like that. And so it's making sure that, again, they know that if you get one wrong, it's not the end of the world. And you just keep moving forward. This is all about learning and growing, not about failure. So I'm trying to leave time for questions. You probably figured out that I can just keep talking and talking. When it comes to math, I can keep talking about it all day long, especially when we're working with students who struggle. Just to go back to my history again, when I took my very first math job, it was teaching, I taught some upper level ones, but I also had a couple of sections of our very lowest level math class that we offered at the high school level. And they said, you only have to do it for a year. We trade it out, etc. And at the end of that year, they said, okay, well, we'll transfer this to somebody else. And he said, oh, no, do not take that away from me. That is the highlight of my day, because when you have a student who is struggling with math and it comes together for them and they find success, I don't know that there is a better feeling in the world. It is amazing to see that growth and that confidence that comes with it. And they suddenly know that, you know what? I can do this. I can be successful. And as I tell them, hopefully you hate math just a little bit less. So with that said, if you have any questions, I see that there's a couple of questions. So one of them is, can you share the slides? Yes. And so I think I'll let the Hawks people address that. Sharing, I see Marissa is typing in an answer, so perfect. Yes, we can share that, absolutely. So another question, I'm at the point where I really need to push some students to get accountable for their attendance and assignment issues, and yet they're fragile. Yes, it's such a balance. It's such a balance. And so it is finding where exactly to push. And like you said, I do think it could be its own presentation. Thoughts for the future. And just getting to know them and how much you can push and at what point you can push. Because avoidance is a very real way that a lot of students address their anxiety. They just avoid it and hope that it will go away. And unfortunately, that makes the problem worse. And pretty soon you're trying to dig yourself out of that hole that you've created. And so making sure that you get that contact made early is a really big deal. Another question, do you have any advice for working with adult learners with math anxiety versus the typical 18-year-old college student? So it's actually really great that you asked that, because I will tell you, I would say that my students at the college level were more so non-traditional than traditional. I had everything from, I did have some dual enrolled students who were high school students, a few, all the way up to, I had a 72-year-old grandmother. But I would say probably on average, my students were in their 30s. And so there is a lot of anxiety there. And in fact, Jackie, who I was referencing, she really, she was a non-traditional student. She had been outside the classroom for a number of years, working in the workforce, and then decided to come back to pursue her degree. And so a lot of those are, number one, they don't want to be treated like an 18-year-old college student, but there also is a 12-year-old junior high student who is suffering in math class that is hidden in there. And so it is really making those connections. And one of the things that I really always tried to do was connect with their personal life. That opens up the doors to them trusting you as you're moving through the math class, so that I could say, oh, hey, your son had football over the weekend. How did he do? Or you got to go see your grandbabies this weekend. How was that? Do you have any pictures? Or you told me that you and your fiance were going to New York this weekend to celebrate your engagement. You've got to tell me about it. I've never been. Things like that make those really personal connections go a long way in helping them get over that hump. But also knowing that sometimes technology is also a challenge, especially for the student maybe who is in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And I'm saying that as a 40-something-year-old, we didn't work on computers when I was even in my undergraduate years. And so some of that is also helping them work through the technology part of it and eliminating that anxiety as well. Another question, do you find that letting students use a calculator helps with anxiety? Oh, 100%, 100%. And I know that sometimes they freeze because, again, going back to elementary and middle school, when they had those time tests and they freeze. And so, and then the other thing as well, when you're working with positive and negatives, I'll say, what's -2 + 8? And how many times do we get 10 as our answer? Or -10. And so it's, okay, there is no shame in a calculator game, is what I would always tell them. Having that tool available, and there is, they'll use their phone, or I always would introduce desmos.com, because sometimes having the scientific calculator on desmos.com is so beneficial, because as you know, in Hawks, if they start you with a fraction, they want your answer as a fraction. And some students, again, they freeze when they see those fractions. Okay, let's support this and let's move forward with it. But knowing that, let's put those supports in place until you're at a point where we can maybe back those off a little bit. So I do find that calculator use helps tremendously with the anxiety. Yes, it seems like there is more avoidance as a solution now than when there was COVID. Yes, because I don't know if you're seeing this, but one of the things that I have seen is that it's really easy to say, I'm going to take my statistics class online because we created all of these online courses as a result of COVID. And then it's really easy to forget that you are in an online math class. And so the solution is avoidance. And so one of the things too that I've actually worked with our student services and our advisors here is, okay, if I'm identifying online students who are really struggling, let's move them into my on-ground section, which we have the flexibility to do here. And so that's one of the benefits of where I'm at. I know that not every place has that, but it is something that does help some students, because honestly, on-ground classes are built-in time management, which is beautiful. And it helps with the avoidance because you're going to at least get some of it done while you're in the classroom, because a lot of times I'll teach a couple of concepts and then, okay, get in your practice. I want to see how you're doing on this one. Helps me monitor how I'm doing as a teacher, but also really helps me see who might be freezing, unable to complete the work, who's confused. What can I do better? What do you do when you are recording a class if you call in students and one student asks a really foolish question? So interestingly, most of the time you can only hear my voice on the recording. But if it's something that's really ridiculous or obscene or offensive, then yes, I would probably cut that part out. Although if it depends on the situation. If it's a foolish question because they really didn't know what I was asking, maybe I didn't present the question well, and so they answered something that was really off the beaten path, or they didn't know I called on the wrong student and they froze. And sometimes that's okay to leave that in, because I'll say, oh, that wasn't quite what I was going for. Maybe we should go in this direction, and I'll try to redirect it. But, you know, if it's the class clown trying to be funny, because you're recording, especially when you first start, they might think that that's funny to get on the recording, then I would probably cut it out when I posted it. But if it's something that's a little bit off, I never want a student to feel, I don't want them to feel like they're failing. I don't want them to feel stupid, so to speak. And so I really try to just like, ooh, you were headed kind of in the right direction, but what about, and then I'll do some leading questions to try to get them there. I think it's also okay to see that, you know what, we all make mistakes, and your classmate made a mistake. And so depending on the situation, more often than not, I'll leave it in. But yeah, if they say the answer is chicken, then I'm going to, you know, cut that out, because we don't need the class clown being recorded. In the example of 8x plus 4 over 2, how do you guide the students to reach the correct answer? So what I do on that one is I split it up into two fractions. I always say you take everything on top divided by what's on bottom. So we're going to take 8x over 2 plus 4 over 2. And then I talk about, okay, now 8 over 2, what can we reduce? Yep, 2 goes into 8 4 times. Is there anything that's going to cancel out that x? Nope. So we're going to leave that there. And then we have 4 divided by 2. So we leave that as 2. So I try to split it up so that they can see how that is broken down. How do you apply these get to know your students' practices with classes of over 100 students or a semester where you have over 300 students? That is a tough one when you have large classrooms and a lot of students to get to. What I really do when I have large classes is I zero in on the ones that I think maybe need me. So when I have students that I'm noticing they're not getting their assignments in on time, or they're not getting their problems correct, they're getting them wrong over and over and over again, then those are the ones that I'm really going to target to make those connections with. The ones who are just flying through and they have no problems, then I'm going to say, okay, they're probably okay. They probably don't need my support like the others do. And I try to really hone that down to a manageable number of students that I can connect with there. And then I see we're at 3:45, so I'll just answer this last question. How do you address tardies when attention is taken off you? Oh, that is a tough one. And in fact, I'll talk about a student, JT. JT entered my class late. I swear every single day, I'm like, JT, we need to get here on time, not in front of all the students. And in fact, what I would do, honestly, is when they were coming in late, is I would just keep on teaching as if I didn't even see them. And then I would then go talk to the students who were coming in late. Like JT, for example, he would raise his hand, I'd come over and I'd talk to him. He would say, I don't know what I'm doing. I said, I know, because you missed my lesson. We need to get you here on time. And I said, but good news for you, I have my video here. So why don't you pop in your earbuds that I know you have in your pocket and listen to the lesson. But honestly, I don't let it disrupt me. I just keep going. And then after a while, the students really stop noticing that and they just keep focused on me because they know I'm not going to stop. So, all right. So thank you so much. I know I went over time and they're probably like, gosh, you got to stop talking. I told you I can talk. But thank you so much for allowing me to spend this 45 minutes with you. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you have great luck working with students with math anxiety.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer Johnke, for all the valuable information you shared with us today. The next concurrent sessions will begin at 4 p.m. You can view the chat for session meeting room links or access the conference website for a complete list of concurrent sessions and their descriptions. While accessing the conference website, don't forget to swing by the virtual exhibit hall to say hello to our Hawks team. While there, you can view a quick 5-minute demonstration, request your t-shirt, and be entered to win a $50 hourly giveaway. Also, in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, you'll find a few golden coins throughout the conference website. Click on the coins to be entered for a chance to win an additional raffle. And we'll see you at the next session. Thanks so much, everyone.